We're going to finish out chapter 1 with just a few slides. The first is going to be about laws. So laws are important relationships that are observed to occur time after time. They're descriptive in nature, meaning they might relate to variables or they're going to tell us what will happen. So an example would be Charles's law, which is a relationship between temperature and pressure in gases. And Charles's law is also a formula. It describes that as the temperature of a gas increases, its pressure will increase. So this is the equivalent of on really cold mornings when you go outside, your low tire light might be on, but as you drive down the road, the low tire light will turn off because the temperature of your tires has increased, which has increased the pressure and has caused that light to turn off. Some other examples are force equals mass times acceleration, which is a really important formula in physics. It's descriptive. It tells us how force is related to the mass of an object and its acceleration. Another example of a law, sometimes it's not necessarily a formula, but it might be something like the law of gravity. So gravity is something that you cannot beat. On Earth, for the most part, you are going to be subject to gravity no matter where you are, meaning it's pulling you down, keeping you on the surface so that you don't float out into space. There are some examples of scenarios where you might feel weightless, and this is where you have the absence of gravity, but outside of those special circumstances, the law of gravity will apply to you. So laws are constants. Laws are like the speed limit. The speed limit is 55. That's the law. Models are a description of a theory or an idea that accounts for all of the known properties. Okay, so the known is important because there's always going to be things that we may not know, but models should account for everything that we know. The models can be physical, mathematical, based on a sketch or an analogy. So most of the time we think of models as being physical, so anatomical models that show you the inside of body parts. You have models that could be of cells, so the way organisms are arranged on a cellular level. The solar system model, another great example. A globe would be a model. So anything that takes something that's either so big, it's impossible to see it in one view, like the Earth. Most of us are on Earth, so we can't view Earth as a whole. We can only see the part of Earth that we're in. So a model of Earth is useful so that we can understand how all the continents are arranged. The other option is if something is so small that we can't see it, a model makes it larger so that we can see it. So that's where this cells, that's a great example. We can't see a tiny cell and see all the parts inside of it, but we can study them under a microscope and build a model that's large enough to put on our table to kind of teach those things. Same thing with the solar system. It's too vast for us to see all of it in one photo per se, but making a model shows us how everything is arranged in perspective to each other. So most of the time models are useful for regimes that are too small or too vast for direct observation. Theories, on the other hand, are going to be broadly based on a set of working hypotheses. So working means that it's not locked in yet. It's not concrete. We're still learning about what the results mean or redefining our experiment. A theory is more fluid. This is where theories get scientists into trouble because theories are usually the topics that are going to be considered hotbed topics. So the Big Bang Theory, the evolutionary theory, because we don't know the laws applied to those theories, and we're still working on sifting through all the data that we have to better understand what's happening, it means that these theories change, and they change sometimes too quickly for the general public to understand what that means and why it's changing. So sometimes theories can look like it's just false information, but what it is just information that is changing faster than maybe we would like, faster than we can teach it. So theories are based on considerable experimental support. So that's important. It's not that the theory will always be true, but what we know now, our current understanding, is that the theory explains a body of information. So they form the framework of thought and experimentation. So a lot of the times our theories will guide our studies. One of the examples, so this is an example of an evolutionary type scheme. Starts with the gibbon monkey, orangutan, chimpanzee, gorilla, and man, shows how anatomically they're all very similar, suggesting that there is a common genetic type relationship between all of these species. Whether that means there's a common ancestor or not, we don't really understand, but we have theories based on how similar man and primates are, that there might be some sort of overlap between the two. Another theory, or another example of the theory, it says, based on what I know about speciation and other examples like this, I hypothesize that the alpine species is a hybrid between the two species of lower elevation. So this is the alpine species and this is the lower elevation. And so what this scientist is saying is, based on what I know about speciation elsewhere, this butterfly, which looks like it's a combination of the two, well, I'm going to suggest that it's probably a hybrid species based on what I know elsewhere. And so sometimes that's what gets scientists into trouble, is we take what we know in a different situation and try to apply it to a new situation. And the application isn't always 100% correct. Sometimes we find out later that our initial idea, our initial hypothesis or explanation wasn't quite right, and that's because we didn't have all the information. And so the theories are more fluid. I always tell my students, if the speed limit is the law, the theory is that you can go 5% or 10% over the speed limit without getting a ticket. So if your speed limit says 55, you might think, well, I could probably go 60 without getting pulled over, because that's the theory, is that that's not enough to warrant the officer pulling you over. But in reality, they can pull you over if you're going 56 miles an hour. So the theory is based on a whole body of information, but even then the theory is not always going to be true. So pseudoscience. So pseudoscience is misleading and often absurd claims of scientific results. So here are some examples of what is considered pseudoscience. You have horoscopes. There is no science behind that at all. A Ouija board, no science. A palm reader or a fortune teller, no science whatsoever. The test that you can apply to determine if something is pseudoscience or if it is science is if the person claiming it has an academic and scientific background. So the Ouija board has no academic or scientific background. It's a Ouija board. If the person using it is not an expert in something, they are not someone that you should be trusting. They're probably not giving you scientific data. They're probably giving you pseudoscience, which is fake science. History of review by scientific peers. So that's one of the things that's great about publications, not like New York Times, not like Facebook posts, but real scientific journals, is that there's a peer review process, meaning when I wrote a paper in grad school, it got sent out to 3 people who do similar research to my own, and they got to read it and tell me where I was wrong, and I had to go back and fix it and address the issues before it could get published. Whether or not the person claiming it participates in scientific institutions and organizations. So if they work for Hobby Lobby and they're telling you that you should take 6,000 milligrams of vitamin D a day, you probably shouldn't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. They're telling you something based on maybe a previous experience. Maybe you're tired, they were tired, they had low vitamin D, you should try it, but that's not real. The 4th test is claim published in a peer-reviewed journal and independently validated by others. So things like the New York Times, blogs on Facebook, social media, those are not peer-reviewed. That is a personal account. The person with the social media can type whatever they want. The person with the blog can type whatever they want. there's no peer review process there. The thing about the New York Times is while there is an editor and a writer, it's not a peer-reviewed process. It's still overseen by an editor, but not by a competitor. And that's where it's important. Competitors are going to be your toughest critics. And so getting something through the peer review process from your peers is very difficult when it's against people you're competing with. The last one is probably the most important. Does the person claiming it have something to gain? So my example I always tell students is on social media, Kim Kardashian used to promote flat tummy tea or something like that. And so flat tummy tea, she swore up and down, flat tummy tea changed my life, flat tummy tea makes me healthy, flat tummy tea gives me the energy to work out, yada, 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 yada. The problem with that is that it's probably not just the flat tummy tea. But does Kim Kardashian have something to gain? Potentially. Because when you click on the link and it says, use Kim K when you check out Flat Tummy Tea to get your 10% off. Well, she's getting something from those clicks and something from you using the code. They get sponsored by these organizations to promote them on social media, so they have something to gain. And that's important to make sure you're vetting that. Now, to practice this one, we're going to use a different type of activity. You'll go back and find it in this week's assignments and make sure that you complete the activity about pseudoscience. This ends chapter 1. Make sure you go back to the very first slide. We should have addressed all those objectives in chapter 1, and then we'll be moving on to we'll be moving on to a talk about laboratory science, which will be our next lecture.